During the family meeting, my parents laid out their brilliant plan: use my grandfather's inheritance to cover my brother's gambling debts. I sat there, letting them dream. What they didn't know, I'd already locked every cent in a trust they'll never access. I'm 36 years old, and at what my parents called a family financial meeting, they calmly informed me that they intended to liquidate my entire inheritance to pay off my younger brother's $500,000 gambling debt. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their meticulously planned ambush into their own personal financial reckoning, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can reach. It began, as these things often do, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The sky was a flat, indifferent gray, threatening rain that never came, but inside my parents' house a storm had been brewing for weeks. My mother, Helen, had been orchestrating this meeting with the gravity of a state dinner. The four of us were arranged in the formal living room, a museum of our family's curated image. Me, my mother fussing with the porcelain teacups that were only ever used for show, my father Richard radiating an impatient authority from his leather armchair, and my brother Bradley. The air was thick, heavy with the cloying scent of my mom's lavender potpourri and a generation's worth of unspoken resentments. Bradley, the golden boy screw-up, was the picture of contrition. He sat hunched in his chair, eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, a role he had perfected through years of practice. My father cleared his throat, a low rumble that commanded attention. With a practiced, deliberate motion, he slid a thick, professionally bound binder across the gleaming coffee table. The cover was dark blue leather with gold embossed letters that read: the Brooks Family Financial Restructuring and Legacy Plan. It was designed to intimidate. It was designed to look like an inevitability mark. As he began, his voice a smooth baritone he usually reserved for closing deals. As you're aware, since your grandfather Edward's passing, your mother and I have been giving considerable thought to the future, to the stewardship of the family's assets. My mother nodded eagerly, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal anxiety. We just want what is best for the entire family, darling, a safety net for everyone. Exactly. My father continued, tapping a manicured finger on the binder. We've had our legal team draft a new family trust. It's a more modern, efficient vehicle that consolidates all of Grandpa's assets, the portfolio, the properties, everything under a single managed umbrella, managed, of course, by your mother and me. Given our experience, he opened the binder to the final page, revealing a document filled with dense legal text, and pointed to a stark blank line at the bottom. All it requires is your signature to transfer the assets and make everything official. He slid the binder and a heavy gold-plated fountain pen towards me. It was a coronation of their own authority. I looked from the signature line to my father's expectant face. I saw the faint, condescending curve of his lips. I looked at my mother's pleading, manipulative eyes. I looked at Bradley's slumped shoulders, and then I let a small, slow smile spread across my own face. It was not a smile of warmth or agreement. It was the smile of a chess player who had seen the checkmate 10 moves ago. They mistook it for surrender. They thought the sheep was finally ready for shearing. They had absolutely no idea the wolf had already locked the gate to the pasture. To understand the chilling calm I felt in that room, you have to understand that the foundation of the Brooks family was built on a fault line, and that fault line ran directly between my brother and me. It wasn't a secret. It was a feature of our design. I have this one memory so vivid. It's like a movie. I can play on demand. I'm 12 years old, walking home from school, the plastic sleeve holding my report card sweating in my hand. It was perfect, straight A's, not an A in sight. I'd studied for weeks, sacrificed weekends. I remember running the last block, bursting through the front door, my heart thumping with a desperate need for approval. Dad, Mom, I got my report card. My dad was in his usual spot, sunk into the deep leather of his armchair, the television murmuring in the background. He reached out a hand, without looking up from his newspaper. I handed him the report card. The silence stretched as his eyes scanned the page, felt like an eternity. Finally, he folded it, handed it back, and gave a single dismissive grunt. Good. That's what's expected. He rustled his paper, and I was dismissed. My mom was in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans, her usual soundtrack. That's wonderful, dear, she called out, her voice distracted. Wash up for dinner. And that was it. My perfect grades, my hard work. It was nothing more than the fulfillment of a basic requirement, like taking out the trash. It warranted no joy, no celebration, just a quiet checkmark on a list of expectations. Fast forward 2 weeks. Bradley, who is 10, comes home. He doesn't run, he saunters. He tosses his report card on the coffee table with a sigh, as if it's a burden he's being forced to carry. My dad picks it up. It's a sea of D's and F's with one glorious shining C- in social studies. The house erupted. That night was a festival. My dad called my grandparents, his voice booming with pride. You won't believe it, Dad, Bradley's really turning a corner. Pulled up his grades. He ordered 2 large pizzas from Bradley's favorite place, the one with the garlic knots he loved, and even let him have a can of soda with dinner all evening. My dad kept clapping him on the back. That's the fight. I like to see, son, the comeback kid. I sat at the dinner table watching Bradley soak up the praise like a thirsty sponge, and I felt a type of loneliness so profound it was almost physical. It was in that moment I understood my value was in my quiet reliability. I was the sturdy, boring foundation of the house. Bradley was the flashy, faulty wiring that periodically shot out sparks, and every time it didn't burn the house down, it was considered a miracle worthy of a parade. My successes were invisible. His avoidance of complete catastrophe was heroic. My only refuge from this strange inverted reality was my grandfather, Edward. He was my father's father. But where Richard was loud, brash, and focused on appearances, Edward was quiet, deliberate, and focused on substance. He was a man who built things to last: his business, his portfolio, his relationships, and he truly saw me while my parents were enrolling Bradley in expensive sports camps. He quit after a month. Grandpa Edward was taking me to his workshop. He taught me how to use a lathe, how to measure twice and cut once. Discipline and patience. Marcus, he'd say, the smell of sawdust and varnish in the air. They're not exciting, but they'll build you a life that won't fall over in a strong wind. I remember one Saturday afternoon. We were in his study. He pulled out two ledgers. One showed his most successful investment ever. The other showed his worst, a company that had gone bankrupt. Your father only likes to talk about the winners, Grandpa said, tapping the ledger of the failed company. But you learn more from the losers. I got greedy on this one. I didn't do my homework. Cost me. It was a painful lesson, but a valuable one. Never be too proud to admit you were wrong, Marcus, and never make an investment in business or in people based on hope alone. Hope is not a strategy. His study was my real school. He taught me about financial independence, not as a way to get rich, but as a way to be free. Money can't buy happiness, he told me, looking out the window at the garden. He's so meticulously tended, but it can buy you choices. It can buy you the ability to say no. And sometimes the ability to say no is the most powerful thing in the world. When he got sick, the roles reversed. I became the caregiver. I learned to navigate the labyrinth of the healthcare system, to talk to doctors, to manage his medications. I'd sit with him for hours, reading him the Wall Street Journal or just being present in the quiet stillness of his room. My parents' visits were brief, punctuated by awkward silences and anxious glances at the clock. Bradley's were even briefer, drive-by check-ins that were more about easing his own guilt than providing any real comfort. It was during one of those long, quiet afternoons that he laid out his final wishes. He explained with a clarity that defied his illness why the bulk of his estate was being left to me. A legacy isn't just a pile of money, Marcus, he'd whispered, his voice thin but firm. It's a responsibility. Your father will see it as a solution to his problems. Your brother will see it as an endless party. I'm trusting you to see it as a seed. Plant it, nurture it, make it grow, protect it from the weeds. After he passed, the first weeds began to sprout almost immediately. The casual comments from my parents about fairness and family unity started to pile up. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my gut that this was more than just a philosophical difference. It was a campaign based on that instinct and my grandfather's lesson about hope not being a strategy. One made a preemptive move just a month after the funeral. I sat in the polished, intimidatingly modern office of Diana Roberts, a highly recommended trust and estate attorney. She had a reputation for being a shark, but in a good way. My family has a history. I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. My brother is financially irresponsible and my parents enable him. I'm worried that they see my inheritance as a communal bailout fund. She listened, her expression unreadable, asking sharp, insightful questions. What is your primary goal, Marcus? To share on your own terms or to protect the assets at all costs? To honor my grandfather's wishes. I said to protect the seed. She nodded slowly. I understand. That day we drafted the two-tiered defense system. Level 1 was a revocable trust, a solid fence. Level 2 was the irrevocable trust, a concrete fortress with a moat. The documents were drawn up, signed, and filed away. It was my insurance policy against the inevitable. For months that policy sat untouched. Then came the day I went to the safe deposit box. My grandfather had left me his collection of antique pocket watches, each one with a story. I went to admire them, to feel that connection. To him, I opened the velvet-lined case, and my blood ran cold. The centerpiece, a stunning 1910 silver chronograph he had inherited from his own father, was gone, just an empty, indented space, and the velvet. Theft was too simple a word. This was a desecration, a violation, and only 3 other people had a key. The low hum of anxiety I'd been living with for months erupted into a full-blown siren. This was at the emergency I had prepared for. I walked out of the bank, my hands trembling, and made the call. Mr. Watkins, I said, my voice tight. It's Marcus Brooks. I need to see you. It's urgent. It's about my grandfather's legacy. Dennis Watkins agreed to meet me, but his voice on the phone was strained. We chose a neutral anonymous location, a corner booth in a dimly lit diner halfway between his office and mine. The air smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. He sat across from me, wringing his hands, looking like a man who was about to testify against the mob. "Marcus, I have to be very careful," he began, his voice low. "Your father is still a client. There are professional ethics, duties of confidentiality." "I understand that, Dennis," I said, leaning forward. I decided against aggression. I would appeal to the man. I knew him to be the man my grandfather trusted. "I'm not here to ask you to break the law. I'm here because I believe my grandfather's wishes are being actively violated, and I know more than anyone how much you respected him." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Someone took Grandpa's silver chronograph from his safe deposit box, the one his own father gave him. Dennis's face crumpled. It was as if I had pulled the final Jenga block from a tower that was already teetering. He let out a long, shaky breath and seemed to shrink into the vinyl booth. His professional composure dissolved, revealing the worried, decent man beneath. "Edward knew," he whispered, his eyes glistening towards the end. "He knew your father's business wasn't as successful as he pretended. He knew Bradley was a black hole for money." He pulled me aside one day after a meeting with Richard. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Dennis, look out for my boy Marcus. He's the only one with a steady hand on the tiller, the only one I promised him I would." He took a napkin and began shredding it into tiny pieces. "I've kept silent for too long out of a misplaced sense of loyalty to the family name. But this is different. This is about Edward's legacy." He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a plain manila folder. It wasn't an official client file. It was his own personal file, his conscience file, as I later learned he called it. He opened it on the table. "It's Bradley," he said, the two words landing like stones. "He's in a different league of trouble this time." He explained the situation. It wasn't credit cards or a bad investment. Bradley had gotten involved with an underground high-stakes poker game. He'd lost, then he borrowed from the game's organizer to try and win it back. Then he'd lost again. The cycle had repeated until he was in a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky. "How deep?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant. Dennis slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a simple sheet from a legal pad, but the number written on it in his neat accountant script made me feel dizzy. $450,000. The room seemed to tilt. $5,000 to a loan shark. I felt a cold, not a fear, tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about safety, my family's safety. "The man he owes, he's not the kind of person you can ignore," Dennis said, confirming my fears. "The deadline is next month. Your parents have been in a full-blown panic for weeks. They tried to get a second mortgage on the house, but they were denied. They have no liquidity. Your inheritance is their only option." The first twist, the sheer scale and danger of the debt, was enough to take my breath away. But the second twist, the one that followed immediately after, was the one that shattered my heart. "Marcus," Dennis said, his voice now heavy with shame, the pocket watch. "I'm sorry, but it's not the first time. They've been chipping away at Edward's memory for years." He then told me the story of the Roman coin collection, my grandfather's most prized possession, a collection of silver denarii. He had spent 50 years assembling a museum-quality collection. About 3 years ago, just after Edward's cancer diagnosis, Bradley had another emergency, owed some bookie about $80,000. Richard and Helen didn't have it. So they came to me. They wanted to know which coins in the collection were the most valuable and the hardest to trace. I just stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. I told them I wouldn't be a part of it, Dennis said, his voice shaking with old anger. So they went to another appraiser. They methodically selected and sold off about a third of the collection, the rarest pieces. They told your grandfather that there had been a leak in the storage facility and the case had been damaged, the coins inside ruined. They put on a whole performance. Your grandfather was devastated. He mourned those coins, Marcus. He thought a piece of history had been lost forever, and they let him believe it. They let him grieve a lie. They had created. The coffee shop disappeared. The smell of onions faded. All I could feel was a white-hot rage, followed by an icy, profound calm. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a desecration. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had stolen from the dead. They had stolen my grandfather's peace of mind in his final years. Any lingering shred of doubt, any thought of compromise evaporated. My decision was no longer just a strategic choice. It was a moral imperative. I methodically gathered the papers Dennis had shown me. I looked at the good, tortured man across from me. Thank you, Dennis. I said, my voice steady. You've honored your promise to my grandfather. Today, no one will ever hear about this from me. I walked out of the diner and into the afternoon light. But I felt no warmth. I felt like a machine that had just been given its final, unchangeable directive. I walked to a nearby park, sat on a bench, and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Diana Roberts' name. This was the point of no return. I pressed the call button. She answered immediately. Diana Roberts. Diana, I said, my voice flat, hard, and unrecognizable even to myself. It's Marcus Brooks. The situation has escalated. It's time activate the nuclear plan, liquidate nothing, protect everything immediately. The days that followed the call to Diana were a masterclass in controlled chaos. While my family was likely plotting their emotional ambush for the family meeting, Diana and I were executing a swift and silent legal coup. My life split into two parallel realities. By day, I was Marcus Brooks' successful financial advisor. I sat in meetings. I analyzed market trends. I reassured clients about their retirement funds, all while projecting an aura of unflappable competence. My nights, however, were spent in Diana's stark glass-walled conference room, a war room where the only sounds were the rustle of paper and the decisive click of her pen. Diana was magnificent. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, coordinating with bankers, brokers, and property clerks. The key to an irrevocable trust strength is its completeness, she explained one evening, pointing to a flowchart she'd drawn on a whiteboard. We're not just putting up a wall. We're building a fortress on bedrock. We have to ensure every single asset is transferred, titled correctly, and legally unimpeachable before they even know there's a fortress to attack. We worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of grim purpose. I signed documents until my hand cramped. Stock transfer forms, property deeds, title changes for the family heirlooms. Each signature felt final, like a steel door slamming shut. But one evening, as I was driving home from another marathon session at Diana's office, the weight of it all hit me. I passed a park where a father was teaching his young son how to ride a bike. The boy wobbled, fell, and the father was there, instantly scooping him up, dusting him off. His face a picture of concern and love. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. I pulled my car over to the curb and just sat there, the engine idling. I wasn't just building a fortress to keep my family out. I was also walling myself, and I went home and found myself staring at a framed photo on my bookshelf. It was taken at a Thanksgiving about 10 years prior. The four of us squeezed onto a sofa wearing goofy sweaters my mom had bought. We were all genuinely laughing at something Bradley had said. For a moment, we looked like a real family, a happy one. The photo was a relic from a time before the lies had become too big to hide, before the desperation had curdled into deceit. Was I about to obliterate even the memory of that happiness? Was this righteous crusade turning me into something cold and unfeeling? The doubt was a physical ache in my chest at 11:30 p.m. Unable to sleep, I broke my own rule and called Diana on her personal cell. I'm so sorry to bother you this late, I mumbled when she answered, her voice instantly alert. Don't be. What's wrong, Marcus? Am I doing the right thing, Diana? The question tumbled out raw and vulnerable. I look at this picture of us, and for a second, I just see my family. Am I destroying my family? She was silent for a moment. I expected a legal reassurance, a reminder of the facts. Instead, she offered something else. That family in the picture, Marcus, in some ways it already destroyed itself. It was built on a flawed foundation. You're not the one causing the earthquake. You're just the first one to build a shelter that can withstand it. What you're doing takes immense courage. It's the hardest thing in the world to stand up to the people who are supposed to love you the most. You're not destroying them. You're saving yourself. And you're honoring the man who taught you how to build things that last. Her words didn't erase the sadness, but they gave me the strength to carry it. The next day, that strength was put to the test. I was at the downtown branch of the main bank in a small glass-walled office with the bank manager, Mrs. Gable. We were signing the final, most critical documents, the ones that would execute the transfer of the entire cash and investment portfolio into the trust's new account. It was the final seal on the fortress gate. As I was holding the pen, my phone sitting on the desk vibrated. The screen lit up with a picture of my father. My blood ran cold. I have to take this, I said to Mrs. Gable, my voice tight. I stepped out into the busy lobby of the bank, turning my back to the office, trying to shield my conversation. Hey, Dad. What's up? I tried to sound casual, but my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Marcus, your mother and I were just talking. We're really looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday. We think it's going to be a very productive day, a real turning point for the family. His voice was dripping with a synthetic, cheerful optimism. It was the voice of a predator closing in. You're looking forward to it too, I said, my eyes darting around the bank lobby. Suddenly, from the office behind me, Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the air. She was speaking to a teller who had poked her head in. Could you witness Mr. Brooks' signature on the asset transfer agreement, please? I froze. The words asset transfer seemed to echo in the cavernous bank. I was sure he'd heard it. I held my breath, waiting for the accusation, but he just chuckled on the other end. Sounds like you're busy. All right, son, we'll see you Tuesday. Don't be late, wouldn't miss it. I managed to say, my throat dry. I hung up and leaned against a marble pillar, my legs feeling weak. The close call had rattled me, but it had also solidified my resolve. The pleasantries, the fake concern, it was all a beautifully constructed trap, and they were walking toward it completely blind. I walked back into the office, picked up the pen, and signed my name. My signature was clear and firm. There was no hesitation left. Walking into my parents' house on that fateful Tuesday felt like stepping onto a stage for the final act of a play I had been rehearsing my whole life. I was no longer an anxious participant. I was the director, and they just didn't know it yet. I carried a simple, unadorned leather portfolio contained a single powerful truth. The scene was set exactly as they had planned. My father in his throne-like armchair, looking magnanimous, my mother fluttering around with tea and feigned warmth, Bradley playing the part of the chastened soul, his eyes downcast. It was a master class in domestic theater. They began with the overture, meaningless small talk. My dad asked about a recent deal my firm had closed, feigning paternal pride. My mom complimented my shirt. It was all a carefully choreographed dance to lower my guard, to create an illusion of warmth and unity before delivering the killing blow. Finally, my father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and adopted a somber tone. Marcus, he said, his voice resonating with manufactured gravity, we're here as a family because we've reached a crossroads, and families, real families, navigate these crossroads together. He opened his impressive binder, the gold letters catching the light. Your mother and I have spent countless hours with our attorneys thinking about the best way forward. The world is an uncertain place. Financial markets are volatile. We need a robust strategy to protect what your grandfather worked so hard to build. It's about security, darling, my mother added, her voice soft and pleading, for all of us, for your future, for Bradley. She glanced at my brother, a single perfect tear welling in her. Bradley on cue sniffled. It was so perfectly, grotesquely performed that I almost had to admire the artistry. My dad turned a page. This new trust structure is the answer. It puts the assets under experienced management. Our management, it allows us to be agile, to respond to threats and opportunities. He paused for dramatic effect, and to address immediate family needs that may arise. He finally slid the binder across the table. The heavy fountain pen was placed beside it like a scepter. It's time to put the family first. Marcus signed the papers. Let's do the right thing together. This was at the climax of their story, the moment their dutiful, overlooked son finally fell in line and saved them all. I looked at the pen, I looked at the signature line, then I looked at my father, and I let the silence stretch. I watched the confidence in his eyes begin to waver, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my own much thinner portfolio on the table. It made a soft, definitive sound in the quiet room. I didn't push it, I just placed it there. A statement. My father frowned. What's that? Some counter-proposal? Marcus, this isn't a negotiation. I know it's not, I said, my voice startlingly calm and clear. The time for negotiation is over. I looked at my mother. I agree that the inheritance needed to be protected vigorously. Then I turned back to my father, which is why I already took care of it. I gave my portfolio a small nudge forward. Confused and annoyed, my father snatched it up and flipped it open. My mother and Bradley leaned in, their curiosity piqued. The cover sheet was all it took. The words were simple, black and white, and utterly devastating to their plans. Declaration of trust for the Edward Brooks Legacy Trust. I watched my father's eyes fly across the page. I could see him register the key phrases, each one a nail in the coffin of his scheme. The words irrevocable trust, the date of execution Tuesday, October 12th, and finally the section detailing the governance of the trust, where he would have read the titles: grantor Marcus Brooks and sole trustee Marcus Brooks. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. My mother gasped a sharp, strangled sound, her hand flying to her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Bradley, who had been watching us like a spectator at a tennis match, just looked utterly bewildered. What is that? What does that mean? He asked, his voice a childish one. It means, I said, directing my words to my brother. But my gaze to my father. That last week, I took the liberty of placing every single asset Grandpa Edward left me into a new, legally impenetrable, irrevocable trust: the stock portfolio, the bonds, the real estate holdings in Vermont, the art, the heirlooms. Every last dollar. I let that sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. The trust cannot be broken. I continued, my voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. It cannot be altered, and as the sole trustee, I have the sole authority over any and all distributions. Your binder, your plan, this meeting. It's all theater. You're trying to gain control over an army that has already been moved to a new fortress, a fortress you cannot enter. My father's shock finally gave way to a wave of apoplectic rage. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His face was a terrifying mask of fury. You did what? He roared, the sound seeming to shake the very windows. You deceitful, ungrateful, you went behind our backs, your own family. My mother was openly sobbing now, not the quiet, manipulative tears from before, but the harsh, ugly sobs of genuine defeat. Marcus, how could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? The irony of that question was so staggering it almost made me laugh. I finally rose from my chair, standing tall for what felt like the first time in my life. I looked at the three of them, the enraged king, the weeping queen, the lost prince, and I felt no pity, only the clean, cold clarity of justice. Everything you've done for me. I repeated, my voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable edge. You mean like secretly selling my grandfather's prized possessions while he was dying and letting him grieve for a lie? Was that for me? Or were you just practicing for this? The accusation hit them like a physical blow. My father recoiled. Speechless, my mother's sobs hitched in her throat. The game was over. Checkmate. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos, a storm of impotent fury and shattered denial. I will drag you to court so fast your head will spin, my father bellowed, his face flushed, a vein throbbing in his temple. I will hire the best lawyers in this city. I will tell a judge you are mentally unstable, that you were coerced. I will undo this. Please do, I said, my calmness a stark contrast to his rage. It seemed to infuriate him even more. Our first step would be legal discovery. I imagine your bank records, your credit card statements, and a full deposition about Bradley's affiliations would make for fascinating reading. I'm sure a judge would be very interested to learn about the $450,000 debt owed to a man who doesn't use legal contracts. Are you sure you want to open that door, Dad? He stopped dead, the threat of public exposure, of having their carefully constructed facade of upper-middle-class respectability torn down to reveal the sordid, desperate reality beneath, was the one weapon against which he had no defense. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. My mother switched tactics. The rage dissolved back into desperate tears. Marcus, please, she wept, reaching a hand out to me. Think of your brother. What will happen to him? These people are dangerous. Is your money more important than your brother's life? This was never about money, Mom, I said, ignoring her outstretched hand. This was about respect. It was about honor, and you're right. This is about Bradley's life. He's been living without consequences for 34 years. Maybe it's time he finally faced one that was the final blow. There was nothing left to say. The threats were empty. The emotional blackmail had failed, defeated. My father grabbed my mother's arm. We're leaving, he snarled. He practically dragged her from the room, with Bradley stumbling behind them like a lost child. The front door slammed with a shuddering finality that seemed to echo through the house, and then silence. I stood alone in the perfect silent living room. The scent of lavender potpourri now seemed like a funeral flower. The two binders lay on the coffee table, a testament to the battle that had just been fought and won. The adrenaline began to fade, and the triumphant high I had expected never came. Instead, a wave of exhaustion, so profound it was almost dizzying, washed over me. I sank into the armchair my father had just vacated. It was still warm. I had won. I had protected my grandfather's legacy. I had stood up for myself. But the victory felt hollow. It was the grim satisfaction of an amputation that saves the patient's life, but leaves him permanently maimed. I had cut the rot out of my life. But the rot was my family. What now? The question echoed in the silent house. I knew I couldn't get the full story from them. They were too deep in their own narrative of victimhood. But there was one person who had stepped away from the family drama years ago, one person who might give me the unvarnished truth. I pulled out my phone, my hands feeling heavy and slow. I found the number, a number I hadn't called in almost a decade. Felt strange to press it. An hour later, I was pulling up to a small, well-kept house in a working-class neighborhood across town. My Uncle Thomas, my Dad's younger brother, opened the door. He was a carpenter, a man with sawdust in his hair and a straightforward gaze. He'd been excommunicated from the Brooks family years ago for the unforgivable sin of telling my father that his enabling of Bradley would eventually ruin them all. He looked at me with open surprise. Marcus, well, I'll be what storm blew you in? We sat at a simple kitchen table, a half-finished model airplane between us. I told him everything, the meeting, the trust, the confrontation. He listened without interrupting, his expression a mixture of sadness and grim validation. When I finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. Wow, he said, shaking his head. The kid finally grew a spine. Good for you. I don't get it, Uncle Thomas, I said, the exhaustion I felt evident in my voice. Why risk everything? Why push me to this point? He got up and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed one to me, his gaze direct and filled with a pity that was somehow worse than anger, because it was the end of the road, Marcus, he said simply, and then he delivered the final devastating piece of the puzzle. Your parents are broke. I mean completely, utterly broke. The house has 2 mortgages on it. Their retirement accounts were drained years ago to cover one of Bradley's misunderstandings in Vegas. The fancy cars are leased. It's all a house of cards. He sat back down, his voice dropping. They weren't just trying to save Bradley from a loan shark kid. They were trying to save themselves from total financial annihilation. Your inheritance wasn't just a bailout for him. It was their own personal lottery ticket, their last desperate hope to keep the whole charade going, and you just tore it up in front of their faces. The year that followed was the quietest of my life. The revelation from my uncle didn't absolve my parents, but it did shift the lens through which I saw their actions. The portrait of monstrous greed was replaced by a more tragic picture, one of pathetic weakness, of two people so terrified of failure that they had sacrificed everything, their integrity, their savings, and ultimately their relationship with one of their sons to maintain an illusion of success. My rage cooled, leaving behind not forgiveness, but a detached clinical understanding. That understanding was a key unlocking me from a prison of resentment I hadn't even realized I was in. With the constant low-grade hum of family drama finally silenced, my own life came into sharp focus. I channeled all that freed up energy into my work, into my own well-being. My practice didn't just grow, it soared. I was clear-headed, decisive, and clients responded to that newfound confidence. About 8 months after what I privately called the reckoning, I attended a national wealth management conference in Chicago. The final event was an awards dinner. I was sitting at a table with colleagues when the keynote speaker, the formidable CEO of a Fortune 500 company and a major client of my firm, Mr. Harrison, stepped to the podium to present the final award of the night in our business. He began, his voice commanding the attention of the entire ballroom. We talk a lot about ROI, about alpha, about assets under management, but the most valuable asset a person can have isn't on a balance sheet, it's character, he continued. And I listened with detached interest until I heard him say my name. And that is why this year's award for professional integrity and ethical counsel goes to a man who exemplifies this principle, Mr. Marcus Brooks. I was stunned. I remember walking to the stage and, a daze, the sound of applause feeling distant and unreal. Mr. Harrison shook my hand, the grip firm and dry, and handed me a heavy crystal award. He leaned toward the microphone. "Let me tell you something about Marcus," he said to the room of industry heavyweights. "He's a man who understands that integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching, it's about what you do when you think no one is. He's a man you can trust, period." Standing on that stage, bathed in the warm spotlight, holding this tangible symbol of respect earned through my own merit, I felt a profound sense of validation that I had spent a lifetime seeking from the wrong people. The approval I had so desperately craved from my father, I was now receiving from men like him, from the world at large, and I realized it meant more. The news of the award and my general success must have made its way back to my parents. The dynamic shifted. The silence from their end was no longer angry. It felt calculating. I knew they were waiting for me to make the next move, to swoop in and fix their broken lives. Now that I was clearly so capable, I thought long and hard about it. The old Marcus would have caved. The old Marcus, starved for approval, would have written a check, bought their love back, and reset the toxic cycle. But the old Marcus was gone. Instead, I chose a different path of boundaries. I had Diana draft a letter. It was sent via certified mail. It was a formal, one-time, non-negotiable offer. It stated that out of a residual sense of familial duty, I would use my personal funds explicitly, not funds from the Edward Brooks Legacy Trust, for two specific purposes. First, full payment for a 90-day intensive inpatient rehabilitation program for gambling addiction for Bradley at a highly regarded facility in Arizona. His enrollment was contingent on his immediate and continued compliance. Any deviation would result in the immediate cessation of funding. Second, I would fund a series of 3 sessions for my parents with a certified financial counselor and bankruptcy specialist. The letter included the specialist's contact information. The choice to call was theirs. The letter was cold, clinical, and left no room for negotiation or emotional manipulation. It was not an offer of reconciliation. It was an offer of a tool, a chance for them to begin the hard work of fixing themselves, something no one had ever required them to do. They accepted. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of people taking a first tentative step into a new, unwelcome reality. The next year was one of hearsay and observation from a distance. I heard through my uncle that Bradley completed the program. He came back to town and got a job stocking shelves on the night shift at a large grocery store. He was living in a small rented room. He was taking the bus. He was, for the first time since he was a child, entirely responsible for himself. My parents sold the house, the grand stage of their charade. They moved into a small 2-bedroom condominium in a less fashionable part of town. They made the call to the financial counselor. Once I saw my mother in the supermarket, we made eye contact across the produce aisle. For a moment, a flash of the old panic crossed her face, then it settled into a weary resignation. We met by the avocados. The conversation was stilted, painfully superficial. We talked about the unseasonable warmth. She asked if I was keeping well. I said yes. There was no hug, no warmth, no mention of the past. It was the polite, distant conversation of two strangers who happened to share a history. As I walked away, pushing my cart, I felt a strange sense of peace. The warmth and closeness I had once craved were gone, perhaps forever, but the chaos, the lies, the guilt, the unending soul-crushing drama, that was gone too, and in its place was a clean, quiet, and blessedly empty space. Last Saturday, on a perfect, crisp autumn afternoon, I drove the 2 hours up to the Vermont property. The restoration was finally complete. The old farmhouse stood proud against the backdrop of the vibrant green mountains, a fresh coat of white paint on its clapboard siding. The stone walls I'd helped my grandfather repair as a boy had been fully restored. The garden, once choked with weeds, was now cleared and prepped for winter, holding the quiet promise of a spring renewal. I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the property, my feet crunching on the fallen leaves. I ended up at the scenic overlook at the far edge of the pasture, a spot where Grandpa Edward and I had spent countless hours. He'd point out the different peaks, telling me their names, telling me that the mountains looked different every day, but their foundation never moved. I stood there breathing in the cool, clean air that smelled of pine and damp earth and looked out at the rolling hills, a breathtaking canvas of red, orange, and gold. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the tall pines. I thought about the maelstrom of the past 2 years, the shock, the betrayal, the cold fury, the hollow victory, and the slow, quiet dawn of a new kind of peace. I thought of my family, each of them now living smaller, harder, but more honest lives. A wave of sadness for the family we could have been washed over me, but it was a gentle tide, not the tsunami that used to drown me. The anger and resentment had finally been scoured away, leaving behind only the smooth, worn stone of acceptance. I reached into the pocket of my jacket, my fingers closing around the cool, heavy metal of the 1910 silver chronograph. After the confrontation, tracking it down had become a personal quest. I found it in a dingy downtown pawn shop, sitting amongst other forgotten treasures. Buying it back, cleaning it, hearing its steady rhythmic tick once more, it felt like reclaiming a small, essential piece of my own history. Holding it in my palm, I finally fully understood what my grandfather had tried to teach me all those years ago. The money, the stocks, the property, that was just the vehicle. It was never the destination. The real inheritance wasn't the number at the bottom of a bank statement. The real inheritance was the lesson of the mountains that your character is your foundation, and it must not move even when the seasons around you change violently. It was the wisdom to know the difference between a garden and the weeds that threatened to consume it. It was the courage to be the gardener of your own life, to do the hard, painful work of pulling those weeds out by the root, no matter who they were. And it was the quiet strength to stand on your own 2 feet, look out at the world you have built for yourself, and feel at peace. That feeling, that solid, unshakable sense of self-respect, was the true legacy, and that was something no one ever could take away.